Dependence, our first webinar, our kickoff webinar with a high-level overview and an introduction to the BIMStorm. This is Kimon Onuma from Onuma Inc. We'll be starting the BIMStorm now. So the first question is, who is here? Who is going to be involved in this BIMStorm? And the simple answer is that it is set up for a wide range of users. You don't have to be technical about understanding BIM or data or anything, or you can be very technical as well. And we'll run through those scenarios today. Who can be involved? So one example is Dion Neutra and his father Richard Neutra. He was a very prolific architect and writer, and he wrote something called Survival Through Design. And I had a conversation with Dion last week, who has been following the BIMStorms, and he's been very interested in them. And he has some very interesting thoughts on survival through the design and about how computers can actually help the design process. And what's interesting about his comments in his books are that what we're doing in BIMStorm essentially is addressing a lot of these desires of being able to process a lot of information and make decisions through the design process. So we welcome the Neutra Institute and the knowledge that they have brought in through the years and the books and the writings that Dion and his father Richard have done. And he's watching us today, and he's going to be giving us input and recommendations as we go through this BIMStorm in the next few months. Dion himself is 90 years old, so he's obviously of that generation that probably doesn't use computers a lot, although he's online and he watches things, and he's even said that he's not very comfortable with the technology, but he has a lot to offer. So it's not about understanding the technology, but being able and willing to participate no matter what level of expertise you have in the technology. So this BIMStorm is really for everyone. And this is going to be a little bit of a different BIMStorm than we've had in the past, and I'll explain why that is. So first of all, I'd like to really thank our sponsors. This is a free event. It's free to participate. You're going to be having access to tools and data and processes and training that normally would take a lot of resources to accomplish and do, but we're going to have sponsors that help support this, and FoxBlocks is our platinum sponsor, and we're highlighting them today. FoxBlocks is a state-of-the-art insulated concrete form manufacturer and market leader in the industry, providing products for architects, owners, and the general contractors of the highest performing and most efficient building envelope available. And what I'd like to focus on about FoxBlocks is they are state-of-the-art. They're not just a product. They're actually doing some really amazing things. They are working with BIMsmith, for example, to get their products into the BIMsmith tools online. And I recommend you go ahead and try going online to BIMsmith and actually looking for the FoxBlocks products. You basically specify a wall system online, and the BIMsmith tools create a Revit output on the fly of your specifications. So the concept of data driving into models this is a great example of that, and FoxBlocks is a leader, obviously, in the manufacturing and product side, but also in the advancement of the technology and the use of the technology for the industry. So thank you, FoxBlocks, for being a platinum sponsor. At our silver level, we have Trimble with SketchUp and a lot of other great tools. They've participated in previous BIMStorms, and they're going to be part of this BIMStorm as well. So we welcome Trimble to this BIMStorm. We will be talking more about Trimble as we go along in future webinars. And ArcCat, online product catalogs, again, web-based catalogs and information about building products. So thank you for your sponsorship. And most importantly today, actually, we're here at Giuliani Associates Architects, and he's letting us use their space. I happen to be in Washington, D.C. this week. I was planning on being in California, where I normally am and where I normally work, and I had to borrow some space. I called Mark up last week and said, hey, can we broadcast from your office in Alexandria, Virginia? And he said, sure. Not only can we use your space, but we can actually record, because Mark is doing something called Architect TV, where he's going to be cataloging and recording streaming sessions about architecture and technology and engineering. And he's actually doing a test stream today. We're not streaming it live to the audience that's online in GoToWebinar, but we are recording. In the future sessions, we'll actually have some live streaming available. So thank you to the Giuliani teams and their use of the space. Foresight Press and Finance Jernigan with Big BIM, Little BIM, BIM Education Co-op, and they've been following us for many years in the BIMStorms, and Onuma, this is my company, Onuma BIMStorm. We've been producing and organizing these BIMStorms. In addition, we have supporters. We have the Asset Leadership Network. Jim Dieter actually is here physically, so welcome, Jim, to the studio here. From the Asset Leadership Network, we had a great event last year at the National Academy of Sciences conference there, which is going to repeat this year in October, and at the National Academy of Sciences and the Federal Facilities Council, a lot of activities here in Washington, D.C. in October. We'll be showing the results of the BIMStorm, presenting a little bit of that, and actually having interactive workshops with the industry. So thank you, Jim, for being here with us on the kickoff. I am part, this is Kimono Numa again, I am part of the Building Smart Alliance Thought Leadership subcommittee of the Building Smart Alliance. We have a great group of people of thought leadership that are pushing the industry forward, many of them online and here with us today. And we've thought of how we can get the message out, and BIMStorm is going to be part of that. We've talked about the Neutra Institute and Dion Neutra and his team. They're going to be viewing and supporting and giving us input as we go along. The Wisconsin Department of Health Services is organizing a conference in October as well. October is going to be a busy month because they're going to be going around showing the results of this BIMStorm. So if you participate, essentially the message is if you participate, there are a lot of things you can learn from this, from a standards perspective, from an industry perspective, from asset leadership perspective, from an owners that are looking in on this, and you have a chance to also produce results that are going to get published and circulated as far as your participation in the BIMStorm. Other participants, we are going to be using the SEPs to BIM work that the Department of Defense, Defense Health Agency, and the Department of Veterans Affairs, two large owners, and we've had presentations about this in the past. This is a huge milestone because we have owner requirement data accessible on the web for the first time where we can actually tap directly into their database and actually work with their data to program requirements for a new healthcare facility. And that's going to be one of the scenarios in this BIMStorm. We're actually going to set up different types of owner scenarios where they're setting up requirements, and we as architects and designers and engineers and planners can work with that data and produce results with that. We're also making it real by being involved with the, we have Solano Community College, which is a community college in California that is involved with the Fusion CCC GIS system, and they have great data, and a lot of us have worked with them, and we still are working with them, and they've agreed to actually share their campus data and building information and their CAD and BIM files and the facility condition process. And they've been very excited about we're actually taking 3 buildings that they have, one that's under construction, one that's a renovation, and another one that's being planned in the future, and inserting it as an actual scenario into the BIMStorm. So we have a range of type of participation, and we want to thank again the owners, the Department of Veterans Affairs and Department of Defense Military Health System, Defense Health Agency, which was a National Institute of Building Sciences project, and the Building Smart Alliance is part of the National Institute of Building Sciences as a committee within the NIBS organization. So there's a lot of mixture of standards and actual owners, a lot of interest from the owner side of seeing results, and that's what BIMStorm is going to be focusing on. It's an open sandbox where you can actually test a lot of these processes out. Again, Asset Leadership Network, you can go online and see their website and information about this, and we'll be putting up pointers to all of this. In fact, a lot of it is already on the BIMStorm site. AIA Wisconsin and the Wisconsin Department of Health Services, so that's the other organization in October, the conference that I mentioned earlier. So back to a high-level concept. This is a white paper published by the Academy of Healthcare Infrastructure at the National Institute of Building Sciences. And there's a lot of documents, or there's 5 different documents, but the opening statement on their documents, all of them is this. There are times when systemic incremental improvement is desirable. This is not one of those times. In other words, we need to move faster than we are now to solve these very complex problems about the building industry and the environment and the use of information and data, and how do we do that better? And as being a member of the Building Smart Alliance and standards organizations, we have, personally I've been involved in the standards development for many years, and I strongly believe in them. But I also believe a lot of what we've been doing has been focusing on the complexity and the importance of the complex standards, but how do we make it simple enough that we can get people excited about using the standards first of all, and then also move the industry forward faster and show results to the owners that are relying on these standards as one example. And this is what we want to do at BIMStorm. We want to say, how can we look at things differently? So it's not just about how do we go about working on building information modeling today on a typical project. All that is still very important and very much central to what we're doing here at BIMStorm. But we also want to think in terms of, we're all used to today of opening up our mobile devices and getting access to information on the fly. We can find the nearest restaurant, you can reserve a table and look at the metro schedule and see how busy the freeways and the traffic is, and make decisions on the fly with very complex data around us. But what we don't have access to right now, and which is unfortunate, and it's also a low-hanging fruit and an opportunity, our buildings and facilities do not have data that we can access in the same way for many different reasons. There are obviously technological reasons, but there's also cultural and business reasons why this is not happening. So we're challenging the industry to change that, and that's what BIMStorm really has been about, is moving the industry forward as fast as possible and looking at that in terms of data and information. How do we get data and information and make it accessible to many users? And this is a diagram from the NIBS project for the Department of Defense, the Defense Health Agency, and VA, where we identified that if you have this three-tiered architecture, as it's called, a Lego block approach, where you have data and you take it outside of locked systems and make the data accessible and secure, and then make the data accessible to many different applications, not to one or two applications, and it's not going to be an export from one app and an import to the next. That's important, and also from a standards perspective, an important thing to do. How do we share information, but how do we share it across the board to all applications, current and the future? And the way that you do that is through the web. The web is the obvious place that we already are used to getting access to information. So the challenge to the participants here in the BIMStorm is, if you put the perspective of who you are, if you're an owner, for example, and you think in terms of, if we can, as an owner, if I can communicate better to the architects and engineers and all the other stakeholders in the design and construction and life cycle process, what would that look like for you? And how can you learn from what other owners are doing so you don't reinvent the wheel and don't make the same mistakes? And from the architectural community, putting my architect's hat on, or an engineer, planner, what are the opportunities once owners make their data accessible? And that's already starting to happen, and we're already seeing trajectories where forward-looking teams, just like the Foxbox example I gave you, there are other consultants and vendors and suppliers and data experts and technologists and owners and non-techies that have already started to jump into this world and look at how do we change things faster and make access to information more valuable, to be able to track our assets, for example, in ways that we can track the information about the nearest restaurant. Why can't we do that with our facilities? So that's kind of the backbone of what this is all about, and we've had extensive webinars that have been posted in June that you can actually watch more of the background material. But what we're doing now in the BIMStorm for the next 2 months is going to be a much more hands-on exercise of how do we not only look at this as a theory, but how do we actually work this through the actual process. And the way to do this is we have to get our hands onto the actual project data. We're setting up sample projects, and we're setting up scenarios where you can participate from any level, even from Dion Neutra's perspective, that he said, I'm not very much into the technology, but I have a lot of knowledge to provide guidance on how to work on this. Or you might be a BIM expert, or you might be a database expert, or you might build applications. There's opportunities at every level. So this is not something that you have to come in and think that you don't have anything to offer or participate in. The fact that you are here listening to this, if you think that you want to fit into this ecosystem and you want to grab that opportunity of this rapidly changing world and rapidly changing industry, this is a chance to do it. And we're going to do it in a pretty rapid fashion. This is a SEPs to BIM website that I mentioned from the VA and DHA that has their program requirement data, which we are going to use. They have, here's a typical requirement for a dental clinic, and then the type of space that we need in this clinic, and the equipment that we need there. That data is accessible on the web, and there are multiple tools that are already directly linking into this and using the data from this into tools like SketchUp from Trimble, taking the data and automatically generating BIMs from that, from servers on the web. There's a lot of documentation through the NIBS projects and white papers where analysis has been done. A lot of this is very important. We've been directly involved with it as well ourselves, where we have to analyze what's the life cycle look like, what are the workflows. All that is important, but it doesn't really mean anything until you actually get in there and start doing something with it. And the BIMStorm, we're actually going to be setting up specific scenarios where we've heard owners say things like, well, we wish we can take design and construction data, move it into facility management, and be able to manage our assets and equipment and spaces in a more efficient way. That's a very specific use case that we hear over and over from owners wishing that they could do this with the data in BIM in the facility management. And the BIMStorm is a perfect place to actually learn what is possible from an owner's perspective, learn what you can do as a vendor and a consultant, and also learn from application developers, people that build the apps around us, which is going to be a larger and larger community because it's easier to do that now. What are the use cases? What are the needs out there? Because that's the most difficult thing when you're building software is, what should I really build? You can't just invent it out of thin air, but if you know a very specific use case of owners saying this is what we want to do, and here's the actual data you can do it with, and then you can build an app that responds to that. That's what we're going to offer here. We actually have the actual data that owners use. We're going to be setting up actual scenarios, and we're also going to be setting these up in an open sandbox, because if they're behind a firewall and you can't get to the data, then you're only talking in theory about, well, here's how it could work. But we're actually taking the same structure of the data, opening it up in a public way, and making that available to the participants in the BIMStorm. So there are going to be 3 tracks, and this is on the BIMStorm.com website. As I mentioned, there's going to be an owner track, AEC track, and the app developer tracks, and there are overlaps between them, and they're all going to be talking about the same projects and data. That's the opportunity of how do we connect these 3 dots and make it accessible to the participants. So to pause a bit and reflect on where we started with this. So in 2008, we started BIMStorm, and we've had close to 40 BIMStorms so far. And they started, and each one had a little bit different theme. This is on, we'll be posting the links to a lot of these, this material. This is on Prezi, kind of a quick overview of where BIMStorm has been and what we did. There was one called BIMStorm Big BIM Bang that was actually in Washington, D.C. I think it was with healthcare and educational facilities as well. Each one of these blocks represents a different BIMStorm, all the way from the first BIMStorm in Los Angeles in 2008. We had many focused on healthcare, others focused on the environment. Build London Live was one of the first BIMStorms there. The AGC forum and the BIM forum, on and on. So there's different BIMStorms. You can actually look at the history of them. This is the first one in Los Angeles. It was using a Woodstock theme where everybody comes and does whatever they want pretty much with the data. It's not a free-for-all. We did have a structured approach to setting up scenarios for planning and designing. And it has evolved from this, but it's still pretty much the same theme of let's put people together in a charrette, in a workshop environment, and see what we can learn from each other and see how we can push the limits of the technology in the process, and then generate opportunities for us. Because as you're going through this, you're going to start having some aha moments that could benefit you in your particular, whichever hat you wear, whether you're an owner or another stakeholder in the design process. So you can look at this online. I'm just going to flip through this quickly here. I don't know how fast it's going to be refreshing here on screen, but it went all the way from, and we're not against using manual methods. Analog is still good. Paper and pencil is still good. But the faster we can get these decisions into a format that can be shared with others, so we don't have to wait and look for that piece of paper, but we want to see the acreage of that site, which was a decision made here. What's the zoning of this area of the city? We were actually setting up planning and zoning scenarios where the planning department would set up the requirements and the designers could react to that. So we want that kind of dialogue between different groups. And we want to remove the friction. You don't have to use any of these technologies. You can even come in with paper documentation. It's open for everybody. So you can watch this online. I'll flip to the next slide here and continue with the presentation. One thing I forgot to say, which I'm going to get scolded here because I was instructed to do this. So I'll pause here for a second. And if you have any questions, there are many people online, so we're not going to open up the microphones to everybody. It would not work in a larger webinar like this. But we do have the tools inside GoToWebinar. There's a questions dialog box on the right side. If you open up the pop-up on the right side of your screen for the GoToWebinar application, there's a box, a little arrow that says questions. Please type your questions in there, and Young from my team is going to be organizing them, and we'll be answering some of those questions at the end, or we'll be capturing that input, good and bad, and whatever it might be, and using it as part of the BIMStorm process. We want to be challenged, so we want you to ask the tough questions, but we also want answers. We don't want we welcome you to observe and just watch what's going on. Like I said, nothing's required here, but the more you can interact and give us input, the results are going to end up in the presentations, like I mentioned, at the National Academies and DC, and we're also going to be producing a lot of white papers and reports. They're going to make their way up to some pretty high-level groups, including there's some discussions about taking them all the way to Congress and things like that. So we welcome you to give input, including to the Building Smart Alliance that we're looking at from thought leadership perspective. So put your questions in the questions box, and we'll organize them at the end of this session. So let's back up again once. So talking about analog and paper, we've all been to meetings like this where we use Post-it pads and we color code different ideas or comments and post them on a wall. And this method has even been replicated into lean design and construction using the Toyota method. For example, something called Kanban, which in Japanese means a board where you put things up. So you have a board like this on the wall. You sketch things, and it's an architect, you sketch an idea and you post it on the wall. You have others review it, and that's really the essence of this, is if you post an idea and you put it on a wall like this, others can see it and can react to it, and you can have a discussion. And in complex workflows like this, obviously there's going to be a lot of things floating around, and the more that we can connect the dots, the better that this can work. And in a charrette, in an architectural charrette, we all know that getting people in the same room together and with an intense, few-hour exercise or few-day exercise, you get to ideas and solutions a lot faster because you can iterate, and that's what we're doing in BIMStorm. Unfortunately, we're not all in the same room or all in the same part of the world, so we use the digital tools that we have, which actually in many cases are more efficient than being in the same room. There's nothing wrong about being in the same room together, but there's also a huge benefit to having things digital and asynchronous as well. We don't have to be in the same room at the same hour. We can actually post something and somebody can come along 8 hours later on the other side of the world and say, hey, I have a great idea for this question that you asked, or this idea that you posted, which is exactly what's been happening in the previous BIMStorm. So how are we going to do this? There are a lot of tools for doing this, but one that I'd like to highlight, this is a use case, and this is part of the learning process and the education that we hope that we can help foster on the BIMStorm, is to show you how we do things else with the different tools that are out there. This is a tool called Trello. And there are other tools like this on the web, and this is a view of what we're doing at the Building Smart Alliance Thought Leadership. We have close to 20 members in Thought Leadership, a lot of really smart people from the industry with some great ideas. We use Trello just like you use those Post-its, and this is a live, I'm opening up the website right now, so I'm actually seeing the Trello board that we use at Thought Leadership. And this board is basically, we have different vertical tracks here, which you think of these again as Post-its, where you can open up and say, well, I have an idea about a hackathon in DC in October. What about that? If you open that up, and you can start seeing discussions that were happening, including links. So Van had an idea and posted, and Johnny Fortune from the Building Smart Alliance posted something here. So we have a track that we can see the decisions that are being made, and these are like cards. You can actually grab them and move them around. Say, well, this doesn't belong here. This is done. Let's move it down the stack, for example, or move it over to the next stack. So this is exactly like posting stuff on a wall, except it's a digital version of this, and we have a way to track and see who's involved. And we can even engage other communities. So this is just one wall for the thought leadership, and there's many different boards that I'm involved with, different walls essentially that I can go and work with. And we've all if you look at the Facebook and other things on the web, it's basically the same idea, but formalizing it for using it for events, things like this. So it could be for your own personal organization, but in this case, we are going to use Trello to help organize teams for the BIMStorm. So for example, you could say, well, I want to form a team that's going to focus on the design and construction of a healthcare clinic for VA. Who else is available and interested to work on this? I'm looking for engineering input, or I'm looking for sustainability support. This is a place to do that, and it's a low-friction way where you don't even need to know anything beyond how to use this Trello board. And it's pretty simple to start using it. In fact, we've already set one up for the BIMStorm. So you can actually see right here, we call it BIMStorm Data Independence. And what do you know? It's an empty wall. It's an empty wall because we're just starting here. So I could actually start posting a list to say, let's form some teams. This is my first Post-it note on the wall, so there it is. And you could say, well, who wants to be on my team? Another Post-it. I want to work on a VA clinic. And so it could really be anything. It could even have links to other documents, to other Google Docs, whatever. You can start posting links all over the place. So it's basically, it just starts going like this, and I can start moving this from one list to the other, for example. I can create another list here, so list 2. That's, whoever signs up for the BIMStorm will get access to this Trello board, and we could even decide to make it 100% public. So these boards, you can say, okay, it's private or it's public. Right now it's set to private, but as we work with different teams, we'll be opening this up. And that's another important part of these BIMStorms is we tend to lean heavily on the transparency aspect. The more that we can see things happening, the more relevant your participation in the BIMStorm. It's kind of a team effort. So if you stay away in a corner and work on something for 6 months, that's great, but it's not as interesting as if you say, hey, I'm struggling with this and I want somebody to help me with it and post it right away. And I see somebody's actually posting something here already, a wish list. So you can start to see notes pop up like this, and you can come back and work with them, and you can even get email reminders that come back to look at it. So it's a way of relying on something beyond email, because if we use email, we all are familiar with it. You send an email to somebody, they do something with it, you have to forward it to somebody else, you get a response back to it, and you get this email, this flood of emails, some of it which is relevant to you, some of it which is not. Here it's a way of organizing messages into little chunks that you can post on a wall and keep working with. So I welcome you to, it's a free application on the web, so if you go to Trello.com, you can get an account. If you log into BIMStorm, we'll point you to it, and we'll get you into the BIMStorm board. All right, so let's continue with the next part of this. So, opposite end of the spectrum. We started with simple note posting on the wall. Now I'm talking to the application and software developers out there. And the trend now, and I've noticed this accelerating in the last few years, especially with a lot of the software out there opening up their APIs and enabling web service connections and to their data. In other words, in the past, software was built as what's called a black box. You had to buy that software to get to the data inside the software, and everybody else had to buy the same software to work with that data. That world just doesn't work anymore. We need to get our data to flow across whatever tool we're using, and we don't even know what software is going to come along next year that needs to use the same information. And so application development is becoming more common and easier to work with and easier to build apps. Just like we never would have imagined that we would have been creating our own websites in 1995 when the web first came around, but now everybody essentially can publish to the web and create web pages really easily and post on Facebook and all that. So that's the world that we're transitioning into. And as innovators in the building industry, as architects, as an architect, for example, I think that we need to be at the forefront of this. We can't wait for the technologies to come to us, and that's another part of BIMStorm that we're doing here, is we're encouraging innovation and using advanced applications, but also if you want to build an application, we're going to give you the tools to build applications on top of data that already exists, so you don't have to do the heavy lifting. So, for example, if I want, and you see this all the time on your mobile devices, if somebody wanted to build a mobile application to reserve to find a ride across the city from one part of the city to the next, they can do that. They don't have to build a mapping application because mapping applications exist, so they can plug in a mapping application in the background and say, hey, we have a great idea for creating an Uber app that calls up rides, and we don't have to focus on building mapping applications or flying satellites to even find locations on a map. All that infrastructure of applications and data has exploded in the last 10 years and absolutely changed everything about how apps are built. And that's why we have this third track here in the BIMStorm. We want the development community out there to show us what software you already have, what great tools you already have, just like FoxBlocks and BIMsmith that I mentioned earlier. There's going to be thousands of these types of opportunities for apps to plug into the building industry. And we want to make it very easy to do this. And this is one of my soapbox speeches here about building smart and the building smart standards. IFCs and COBE and all that are great and they're very important. We're not discrediting any of that. On the other hand, it's very difficult for an application developer that doesn't know the building industry and has to understand IFC first before they build applications on top of that. And that's something that's not very well understood in the standards world out there. We need to make it as simple as possible for application developers to link to our knowledge and create solutions for us, or we need to make it as simple as possible for us to create software applications on top of our building data, which we're experts at, that make the world better for us and for our customers. So this is a challenge to the building standards groups out there, which they're doing great work, including one that I'm directly involved with. How do we flip this model around and not require software developers to have to understand the complexities of IFC before they can build apps for us? That's what BIMStorm is going to focus on. How do we get there as fast as possible, shift the industry, and get to what's called in the UK a BIM level 3. This BIMStorm essentially is a BIM level 3 that's already happening. So that's a challenge. It's an interesting thing that's happening, and it's an opportunity because we're going to walk everybody through that. You don't have to understand everything. We've set up the structure and infrastructure to do that, and you just have to come in and show us where you plug into this ecosystem. So for example, the VA and DoD data that I mentioned earlier, which used to be distributed, literally distributed by CDs that were mailed out to everybody until about 3 years ago, where they said, what are your standards for equipment and spaces? They said, well, here's the latest CD. That was happening up to 3 years ago, 2013. Imagine that. Can you imagine asking Uber to send you a CD to tell you where their latest, how you can get a cab on the street, or how you can get information about where's the latest, what's the latest flight going out from DC to Los Angeles? We need to move the building industry as fast as possible into this real-time world, so it's already possible to do. And the first owners that have done this, and this is part of our work with NIS, we convinced a Department of Defense owner that they should take their data and make it publicly accessible on the web instead of distributing it by CDs. Very simple concept, and they actually did it. And it's amazing because an equipment database now is available live on the web. So if you're a software developer, think about this. The equipment database is live on the web, therefore you can build an application that does stuff with that equipment database. That makes it easier for architects to specify equipment for their projects. Or you can be an architect that already has an app that can plug into that. Or you can access their room and department requirements and say, what does a typical dental clinic look like for VA that has several thousand pieces of equipment? Architects should not be manually processing information and jamming it into BIM. The data like this is accessible, so you can flow it in and create BIMs on the fly. And we're going to give you access to and instructions on how to use these tools for all parts of it, not just for building apps, but for working on design projects, so it becomes more efficient and provide greater value back to the owners. And there's free utilities on the line, online, and our system, the NUMA system, is one of the things that plugs in, but it's really insignificant. Other applications have already plugged into this, and we want more vendors and more software applications to plug into the system that the VA and DoD have opened up. So that's what Steps to BIM is all about. And we'll be talking about that quite a bit and giving you access to the actual data to work with. On the right side, if you don't want to deal with the data at all and you only want to work on the design, on the lower right side you see a requirement model of spaces with room data sheets essentially. Here are all the spaces that you need in this dental clinic. Go design with these pieces. So you don't have to deal with the data if you don't want to. If you want to focus just on the design, that's fine too. The key thing is that we're all talking about the same thing, because if we're working in this ecosystem, we're all working with the same data, and we can work with whatever application we want. And these are some of the vendors' applications that have already started to plug into the steps to BIM ecosystem. So there's ArchiCAD from Graphisoft, there's Atania with medical equipment data, there's Onuma System Online Web, there's 3D Warehouse and SketchUp and Trimble, there's Autodesk Revit, and there's BIM Object. So all of these tools now are in alignment with this data that used to be distributed by CD, but now because it's on their web, they can link to the source data and not have to worry about converting the CD data into some tabular format into some database and importing it into their application and trying to keep things in sync. So having real-time access to the background data absolutely changes everything, and is part of what we're focusing on in BIMStorm. How can we keep this live data going? So one example is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers looked at the steps to BIM process. This was part of the Building Smart Alliance prototype that we did, and we said, okay, what if a new engineering group like the Army Corps of Engineers came in and looked at this data requirement? Could they go through a design process very rapidly and work it into their workflow of using their tools? This was a 2-day charrette in the Seattle district of the Army Corps of Engineers, where we brought 4 people together that were physically there and that flew to Seattle or were already in Seattle. We had a group in Los Angeles, another group in Hawaii, and others around the world that were logging in, and we collaborated using Trello and using the online data and using the different BIM applications, Revit and SketchUp and ArchiCAD, and the testing of that data in a few days to validate and look for places where there might be problems and adjusting things that might not work, the plumbing between these different tools, what worked, what didn't work. And these are some of the results of that, using the various applications to run through the workflows. So now back to this BIMStorm. For data independence, we've set up projects with actual data. Some of you might recognize this floor plan. I believe this is the Kobe clinic that the Building Smart Alliance has been using for the Kobe validation, that has a Revit model and the mechanical model, data and attributes inside that has been pulled into a model server on the web and is created as a scenario in the BIMStorm, and we're going to set up a requirement model like this, or you can use this model to connect your tools to show how it would be used for life cycle, for example. Same model, Kobe Clinic in a 2D view, and in our world too, a lot of us think of BIM as being 3D only, but even 2D data with 2D graphics with data associated with it is just as powerful, and in some cases more powerful than the 3D alone, because you don't necessarily always have to look at 3D, and if you want to pop it into 3D, you open up in a 3D application. So it's the applications that use the same background data, you can open it up in different formats. Okay, so a few days ago we made this announcement, and this is the first time we're talking about this publicly on the web, and this is extremely exciting for us at the Building Smart Alliance, and the fact that we're actually announcing it in this BIMStorm. This is a project initiated by the Building Smart Alliance Thought Leadership Subcommittee, of which I'm the chair, and we have a group of 20 people there. We were challenged by saying, what if we look at some of these tools that are out there and think in terms of how do we build an open source version of BIM that's easy to implement, easy to use, and what if we even use this as an opportunity to how can we build and create standards much more efficiently rather than a long drawn-out process. So this is still a prototype, so we didn't necessarily have to ask permission of how should we or shouldn't we do this or how are standards built. We kind of stepped outside of the current way of things are done and said, what if we just start from scratch and see if we can do this within a few weeks. And this is part of the new way that software is developed now. There's something called Agile software development, where things are built really quickly, and you build a first version, and you put it out there to the world, and you have people react to it, and you start building new functionality on top of that. That's how a lot of these web apps are built. It's no longer this long, drawn-out, let's plan for 1 year of what we need to build, and then let's start building the software, and oh, we forgot something, and then the software failed. And a great example of that failure is healthcare.gov. It was drawn out, it was built, it was put out there, and it crashed after millions and millions of dollars. So what you want to do is do fast iterations, build really short, quick wins, and test them. And we're very used to doing that as architects. We do that all the time, even before computers came around. You sketch on a piece of paper before you build the building. You sketch and you keep on refining it, and you do it, and you collaborate and charrette. So in the software world, which actually the software world looks at architecture and architects and how we think, and there's a lot of books that even have been referenced that architects wrote in the software world, for the software architects looking at building architects. And we're going to use that same approach back in this BIMStorm and kind of combine technology and architecture and look at how we build things like this. So this is an application, and it's not the final version, but it's pretty exciting how far we got in just 6 weeks, pretty much. It's a BIM, GIS, and a facility management type of tool. And what it is it's an open source project, which means we're inviting others to look at how we wrote this code. And it was a small core group that built this. And there's still things that need to be fixed, but we actually got it to a point where it's using existing open source and industry standards. So we didn't have to invent a new standard, and we built it on top of, and we're getting a little technical here, but essentially we're saying we built new applications, new software on existing standards. Existing standards, in this case, for the techies out there, are JSON. JSON is a web service. It's a way to put code that you see on the left side on the web and have other applications read that code and do stuff with it. So in this case, JSON is about mapping. So you see something that says I'm a polygon in the code, and all of a sudden it creates the shape of a building. GeoJSON has been focused a lot on geography, GIS systems, but doesn't have a lot about interior of buildings. So what our focus was, can we marry the world of mapping with the world of buildings and have this all in real time on the web and link to a lot of other different tools. This is dramatically different than taking a CAD or a BIM file and converting it and parking it. This is about keeping source data somewhere else in a BIM application on a server, being able to change that, and being able to read it in another tool like Leaflet. Leaflet is the GIS map viewer that you see on screen. So this, within a few short weeks, we were able to not only think in terms of prototyping, we actually have a functioning version of this that drills all the way into a building from a global scale, a portfolio. You'd have dots on a map, and we've all seen these maps on the web. It's basically, here's a dot about whatever, the restaurant in Washington, D.C. Let's click on that restaurant and make a reservation. This is extending that idea, but marrying it with building information modeling in CAD and being able to get that geometry and from models linked into this. And for those that join the BIMStorm, we're going to give you access to this to use and to test and to build applications on top of and to give us comments on it and to let us know how you think this could work for your organization. We know from our previous experience with actual projects that this desire has been out there from a lot of large owners, and in some cases they've been talking about it for years about how they want to build something like this. So they started to prototype it and never got it to the full stage, or it got to a pretty good stage, but then it never was open, so nobody else could access it. Here we're flipping it around and giving access to different modules of this. So we're keeping it simple by not saying it's a huge application. We're keeping it simple and saying, here's the code, so we're going to give access to the interface and access to the code, and you can actually try this out yourself. So let's see how I'm talking away at it here, but let me take a breather here and switch gears a little bit. If there are questions, I could start taking them later on, but maybe I'll keep going here and show a few more things. So back to the BIMStorm, I want to walk through a few things on the website. If you go to BIMStorm.com, I've been encouraging you to, you've obviously joined after the webinar. If you decide this is something of interest for you in the next few months, and you don't have to commit to a specific date or anything, we're going to have this. We're going to have continued webinars. We're going to have offline interactions as well with different teams. The next step to do is to actually join the BIMStorm. So if you say, why join? And over here on the right, there's a join button, but there's also buttons all over that says join the BIMStorm. So I would encourage you, if you want to join the BIMStorm, is to sign up here. Once you sign up, you will get instructions on where to get access to tools and data, free tools. We're going to be, a lot of our sponsors are going to be providing access to information and data. And ourselves, the Alnuma system is going to be made accessible for 3 months to anybody who signs up, so you'll be able to access the data. So if you sign up here, you'll get free access. There's no payment required to join or participate. We're being fully supported by sponsors, and we want to encourage participation from all different groups, all the way from educational facilities to owners to developers, so please sign up here. I also encourage you to look at the Data Independence tab and look at the schedule. We have schedule posted here of different events, and we actually haven't posted the date here. I have it on my slides. On the next scheduled webinar is going to be September, I think we picked September 12th, right? September 13th. The next webinar is going to be September 13th. Between now and then, we're going to be sending out the links and access to data and access to scenarios and encouraging formation of teams and actually starting to interact. We've already started actually with the Solano Community College that I mentioned earlier. We're working with their facility management team and the owners of that district, and we've received their data, their actual project data, which we're going to be putting in here, which is an incredible opportunity to see actual data as it's being worked on a project and see how it applies to you. So that's the September 13th date. If you put that on your calendar, we'll be sending out invites after you've signed up. So join here, and we will be posting on the website, on the BIMStorm site, more technical details as we go along, and they're made available. We mentioned who the sponsors are. I'd like to thank the sponsors once again as we get close to the end here. Fox Blocks again, ArtCat, Trimble, Anuma BIMStorm, Foresight Press, Giuliani, and BIM Education of Giuliani Digital, and BIM Education Co-op. The supporters here, Asset Leadership Network, Wisconsin Department of Health, Building Smart Alliance, Neutra, and obviously Solano and the DODVA for providing the tools that are online and the data about their projects. We are still looking for other owner participation, so if you are an owner out there that either has data or wants to use the data that we already have and adjust it for your needs and say we want to create a scenario for whatever, a clinic somewhere else or a healthcare facility, please join us. And we are still looking for sponsors. We have a lot of conferences and events that are going to be happening, so we're encouraging others to sponsor and join. And as the different teams form, we will be posting your names here. If you want your name public, if you want to use a pseudonym, that's fine too, but we encourage transparency and showing who you are and what you're working on. And these tabs along the top will have information about what the owner's perspective is, what the architects and engineers' perspective is, and the API, the developer's perspective as well. And then the GeoJSON work I mentioned is also, we haven't opened this particular page up yet, but we'll have access to the GeoJSON tools as well. And I think we're a few minutes away. I wanted to show just live quickly the GeoJSON just to show that it's not just a slide. But as we finish up here, if there are questions, we can take them. If not, there are a few questions, Young. I don't know if you wanted to post anything or not. We'll just keep them going. I'm not going to read them myself, but if anybody can digest them and post them back to me on the private messages, and I could address them while I'm showing the live GeoJSON. Again, I want to stress this is a first version, so it's not final, but it is, each of these dots is an actual location that has information about a building. So this dot, for example, is the Kobe Clinic. Then we have a clinic here in Washington, D.C. We have the Solano campus. So if we zoom into Solano, you can actually see their campus here. I click on the campus here, look at the Solano campus, and there's links to different tools. So it's not just links to the graphics, we're actually linking to other engineering reports, for example, or individual buildings. This is their campus here. If I click on one building, you see this is actually some of their facility surveys that they did with the actual photographs. You can see the first floor plan. They worked with a group of architects and engineers called Steinberg from San Jose that documented their buildings. You can actually see the individual spaces and actual data associated with it. And as you zoom back out, this data kind of disappears and goes back to the map view. So you can turn different layers on and say, well, I want to see the OpenStreetMap or Esri map of that location. One more I'd like to show, since we talked a lot about the clinic, is the VA DoD clinic that we set up in our previous presentation. Some of you may have seen, is we've actually set that up as a project now that's going to be accessible to the participants, and we parked it for now in the middle of Washington, D.C. It's right here in this site, and if I zoom into this, you actually see the clinic building here, and I want to go to the first floor, and I just want to prove the point that if I zoom all the way into here and want to load components, each space actually has equipment loaded in that originated in the SEPS, the Department of Veterans Affairs database that they have online of equipment requirements for a typical office like this. In this case, it's a duty on-call room, as they classify it. And each of these pieces of equipment has attributes. So this again is about what I stressed earlier. None of this was typed or exported or imported or IFC'd export and IFC imported. It's a direct link to the owner database that streams into these models. So I, as a designer, don't have to worry about anything else but focusing on this is a requirement and I need to design with it. And that takes all the complexity away of dealing with the data import and export. And from here, you can go and use it on different tools like Revit and SketchUp and Onuma, ArchiCAD, the ones that have links to it. For the software developers out there, on the right side, this is getting a little techy, but I just want to prove the point that all the source code for how this was built is here on the right side. So if I say I want to see a list of current spaces, it's not going to look like a graphic anymore, but boom, it's going to hit the same server and give me the code. This is the JSON code, which says, for example, here's a polygon of, I think this is a building. Here's a polygon of a room, the XYZ coordinates. There's attributes about the room. So this is a machine code that can be used to generate shapes and generate buildings and generate CAD. And it's all exposed here for developers to actually see and work with that. And we're going to be running through scenarios of what you can do with it. So this is just one interface of what you can do with this data, but I'm sure a lot of different ways are going to emerge as we continue on with this leaflet BIM GeoJSON project. Okay, so I think we're getting close to the end here. Thanks for your participation. I think I had a few more slides. Yeah, we went through this already. I want to remind you that there are upcoming events and actual conferences, physical conferences are going to be happening in October, quite a few of them. We'll have them all posted on the BIMStorm site. We already do, in fact. So if you're in Wisconsin, for example, we're going to be setting up scenarios in the next month or so that are going to be specific to Wisconsin and the AIA and architects there and the Wisconsin Department of Health Services and the healthcare owners that are gathering there for this annual conference. And we will be presenting at this conference the results of the teams that are doing their work and how this process worked, and actually interacting with the audience members there to show how this is actually possible to start actually working with the data live. And our next webinar, September 13th, please sign up. Each webinar, you do have to sign up to get access information to the webinar. So every webinar itself needs a sign up, but the BIMStorm participation is a single sign-up that I mentioned earlier. To sign up and you'll get instructions and pointers to all the tools and data that I mentioned earlier. I think we've decided not to take questions. It seems like that's what's happening, so that's okay. We'll document your questions and we'll post them online. If you join the BIMStorm and you form smaller teams, we'll actually have interactive live, so you can actually have voice and video and audio access to the teams and actually start running through workshops and scenarios. I believe Giuliani's group here is going to be also documenting some of these events through this live streaming on the Architect TV that's going to be posted, and it's going to be, in this case, it's being posted as a recording, but in the future there's also going to be some events that will be live streamed from Giuliani Digital. So thank you, Giuliani and team, and thanks for hosting us here, and thanks to everybody online for joining us and for kicking off this first BIMStorm webinar for 2016. And I think with that, we will sign off. Thank you very much.